My daughter forgot to hang up the phone. I heard her say 5 words that changed everything. He's not safe alone anymore. I didn't say a word back. 3 months later, she and her husband came home from a cruise, smiling right up until their key wouldn't turn in the lock. Taped to the door was an envelope with her name on it. When she opened it, she dropped to her knees on the porch. My name is Walter Briggs. I'm 68 years old. For 36 years, I ran a hardware store on Route 9 outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, selling nails and paint and good advice to anybody who needed it. I raised one daughter in the house on Chestnut Ridge Road, buried my wife from that house, and figured I'd spend the rest of my days puttering in the garden out back until they carried me out feet first. My daughter had a different timeline in mind. This is the story of how I found out and what I did before she ever got the chance to act on it. My wife Donna died 18 months ago on a warm October afternoon, sitting in her favorite chair on the back porch with a book open on her lap. I was inside making sandwiches. By the time I brought them out, she was gone, and just like that, 38 years of marriage ended between one sentence and the next. The house on Chestnut Ridge Road went quiet in a way that scared me at first. I kept 2 coffee mugs out every morning for a month before I finally put one of them away. My daughter, Renee, called me most evenings, and about 4 months after Donna passed, she and her husband Todd drove over on a Sunday with a proposal that sounded, at the time, like the best news I'd had in ages. Dad, you shouldn't be out here all by yourself, Renee said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table with her hand over mine. We were thinking, what if we sold our place in Mechanicsburg and moved in here with you? Split the bills, keep each other company, and you'd never have to eat dinner alone again. I said yes before Todd finished pouring the coffee. Within a month, they'd sold their townhouse and moved into the 2 guest rooms upstairs, the rooms Donna and I used to joke we'd fill with grandchildren someday. For a good while, it really did feel like a gift. Renee cooked most nights, real meals, not the frozen dinners I'd been living on. Todd fixed the fence line out back and reshingled part of the roof without me having to ask twice. We watched the Steelers together on Sunday afternoons the way Renee and I used to when she was a girl sitting on my lap in front of the television. And for the first time since the funeral, the house felt like it had a pulse again. I told my neighbor Ray, who's lived across the street since before Renee was born, that I was the luckiest father in Dauphin County, having my own daughter look after me the way she did. I had no idea, not the faintest idea, that the woman pouring my coffee every morning was already circling a date on a calendar somewhere, counting down to the day this house would stop belonging to me. Around the 5th month, small things began to shift, the kind of things you talk yourself out of noticing because you don't want to believe what they might mean. Todd started referring to the garage as our garage when he talked to his buddies on the phone out on the driveway. Renee replaced the old recliner, the one Donna always said made the living room look lived in, and when I asked where it went, she said it was falling apart and she'd donated it, though it had looked just fine to me the week before. Todd started asking about my finances more, casual at first, whether the mortgage was paid off, which it had been since 2011, whether I had any other property, whether I'd ever thought about what would happen to the house down the line. I brushed it off. A son-in-law should take an interest in family matters, I told myself. One evening at dinner, Todd mentioned that a guy from his gym had just sold his late father's place over in Camp Hill for close to $780,000, cash, closed in 11 days. Market's insane right now, he said, looking around my kitchen in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up, though I couldn't have said why at the time. A few days later, Renee had a woman named Cheryl over for coffee, introduced as an old sorority sister. It wasn't until much later I learned Cheryl sold real estate for a living, and that she'd walked through my whole house that afternoon, upstairs and down, while I was out getting my truck inspected, jotting things down on a little notepad she kept tucked in her purse. Looking back now, I can lay every piece of it out clean and straight like tools on a pegboard. At the time, all I saw was a daughter and son-in-law settling into a new routine, and an old man, grateful not to be alone in an empty house anymore. Hold on to that feeling with me for a second, because it's the same trust that made everything that came after cut so deep once I finally understood what was happening under my own roof. About 7 months in, Todd started saying things like, "Walt, you seem a little foggy lately, even on days I felt sharp as a tack." I misplaced my truck keys one Saturday morning, same as I had 100 times over the years, and by that evening, Todd was telling Renee across the dinner table, like I wasn't sitting 3 feet away, that he was starting to worry about my memory. I laughed it off, told him everybody loses their keys now and then. He didn't laugh back. Within a week, he was insisting on driving me to my cardiologist appointment, even though I'd driven myself to every appointment for the last decade without a single problem. And he sat in that exam room asking Dr. Ose pointed questions about confusion, disorientation, whether stress could accelerate cognitive decline in a man my age, questions I never asked and sure didn't need answered. Then Renee started leaving brochures on the kitchen counter, propped up against the sugar bowl where I'd be sure to see them. Glossy pamphlets with soft lighting and gray haired actors smiling over games of cards, for places with names like Maple Terrace and Whispering Pines. When I asked her about them, she smiled that same smile she'd had since she was 6 years old, getting caught with her hand in the cookie jar, and said, "Oh, those are just for later, Dad. Just in case. Nothing to worry about right now. Just in case." That's the exact phrase she used. I didn't push back. I didn't want to be the bitter old man accusing his own daughter of something ugly over a stack of pamphlets. So I kept my mouth shut, kept smiling, kept thanking them both for thinking ahead. While some part of me, the part that spent 36 years reading customers who were about to walk out without paying, started listening a whole lot closer to every word coming out of that girl's mouth. It happened on a Tuesday morning in May. I'd gone down to the basement looking for a box of Donna's old canning jars I wanted to give to the church sale, poking around the way retired men do when they've got nowhere particular to be, when I heard Todd's voice drifting down through the floor vents from the kitchen above. He was on the phone, talking low and quick, the way a man talks when he thinks the house is empty around him. I stood still at the bottom of the basement stairs and listened. "No, I'm telling you, the doctor already put something on the chart about memory concerns," he was saying. "That's documented now, that's on paper. That's exactly what we need if we're going to get him into Maple Terrace without a fight. We're not throwing him out, Cheryl. We're getting him the care he needs. He can't be out here alone at his age. Everybody knows that." A pause. Then he laughed, a short, ugly little laugh I'd never heard out of him before. Cheryl already ran comps on the street. We're looking at right around 780 for the house as is, maybe more if we list before the leaves turn. That's more than enough to cover a place like Maple Terrace for the rest of his life and still leave plenty on the table for us. He's not safe alone anymore. That's just where we're at. I stood at the bottom of those basement stairs with a box of canning jars in my hands for what felt like a full hour, but was probably closer to 90 seconds, and I did not make a sound. I set the jars down soft on the workbench, climbed those stairs slow and quiet, and walked straight out the back door into the yard, like nothing on God's earth had just happened, even though everything had. I'll be honest with you about something. My first instinct standing at those basement stairs was to march into that kitchen and ask Todd exactly what kind of man talks about his wife's own father like he's a used mattress somebody needs to haul to the curb. I didn't do it. 36 years running a hardware store teaches you plenty of things, and one of the most valuable isn't how to mix paint. It's how to keep your face steady when someone's lying straight to you, so you've got time to figure out their whole plan before you ever open your mouth. So that night at dinner, I ate Renee's pot roast and asked Todd how his softball league was doing, same as any other Tuesday. I didn't mention the phone call. I didn't mention Maple Terrace, or the $780,000, or the fact that my own son-in-law had just talked about disposing of me the way you'd talk about an old water heater that finally gave out. I went to bed that night and did not sleep, not for one single minute. I lay there staring at the ceiling, running through every one of those pamphlets left by the sugar bowl. Every appointment Todd had suddenly started tagging along to, every casual question about my mortgage and my savings and whether the house was paid off free and clear, every piece of it clicked into place at once, like a lock finally finding the right key. Sometime around 4 in the morning, lying awake in the house I'd bought with Donna back in 1988, the house where I'd raised the very daughter who now wanted me gone, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to accuse anybody of anything before I had it locked down tight. I was simply going to find out exactly where I stood, legally and otherwise, before either one of them got the chance to make a move against me. That Thursday, I told Renee I had a follow-up at the eye doctor and drove myself across town in my own truck, a 2009 Silverado I'd had since it was new off the lot. Instead of the eye doctor, I drove to see a lawyer named Patricia Alvarez, whose office sat above a dry cleaner's on 2nd Street, recommended to me years back by a fella who used to buy his lumber at my store. I sat across from her desk and told her the whole thing, start to finish. The pamphlets, the doctor visits, the phone call I'd overheard in the basement, every last detail laid out flat on the table between us. Patricia listened without once cutting me off, taking notes on a legal pad, and when I finished, she pulled up the county property records right there on her screen. "Mr. Briggs," she said, I want to be very clear with you. This property is deeded solely in your name, not your daughter's, not your son-in-law's, just yours. Unless you've signed some kind of power of attorney or other legal document handing over control, nobody, and I mean nobody, can sell this house, place you in a facility, or touch a dime of your money without your say-so. Then she asked me something that made my stomach drop clean through the floor. Has anyone in your household asked you to sign paperwork recently? Anything they described as insurance updates or medical forms or something along those lines. And it hit me right then. A stack of documents Todd had left on the kitchen table about 10 days earlier, telling me they were just updated homeowners insurance forms that needed my signature before the policy renewed. I hadn't gotten around to signing them, kept telling myself I'd do it once I found my good pen and my reading glasses, kept putting it off the way you put off anything that feels like a chore. Patricia told me to bring those papers in right away. When I did, 2 days later, she confirmed exactly what we'd both already suspected sitting in that office. They weren't insurance forms at all. They were a durable power of attorney, granting Todd full authority over my finances, my medical decisions, and my home. I never signed that document, and I never will. But finding out what it actually was changed something in me for good. I wasn't just a father being whispered about behind his own back anymore. I was a man whose own daughter had let her husband try to trick him into signing away his entire life over a stack of papers dressed up to look like nothing at all. Patricia helped me sort through my options and put me in touch with a realtor she trusted without reservation, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Denise Okafor, who worked out of an office in Camp Hill and had a reputation for closing deals fast and keeping her mouth shut when a client needed discretion. I met Denise at a diner off Route 15, paid cash for both our coffees, and told her plainly that I wanted my house sold without my daughter or her husband knowing a single thing about it until it was already done. Denise didn't ask why. She just nodded like she'd sat across from this exact story more than once in her career, and told me a house like mine, 3 bedrooms, updated kitchen, sitting on half an acre with a 2-car garage, could realistically pull in close to $780,000 in this market if we moved quickly and kept it quiet. I opened a new account at a credit union on the other side of town that neither of them knew existed, had my mail rerouted to a PO box, and started meeting Denise every Thursday afternoon while Renee and Todd believed I was at physical therapy for my shoulder. For the first time in months, I felt like the one holding the tools again, and I can't properly describe how good that felt. To keep Renee and Todd relaxed and looking the other way, I did something that still makes me grin a little even now. I let them drive me out to tour Maple Terrace. I walked those hallways with the soft carpeting and the smell of fresh coffee brewing somewhere out of sight, nodded politely at the calendar of activities pinned up by the front desk, and told the woman giving the tour that the dining room had a nice view of the courtyard. All the while, knowing full well I had zero intention of ever spending a single night there. Todd looked so pleased with himself in the car afterward, telling Renee that I'd seemed really receptive to it, that I almost felt bad for him. Almost. Meanwhile, Denise had quietly listed my house through a private network, never posted on the big sites Renee or Todd might stumble across scrolling on their phones, marketed only to a handful of serious, pre-vetted buyers. Within 11 days, we had 2 solid offers on the table. The stronger one came from a young couple named Marcus and Aisha Whitfield, expecting their first child in the fall, who fell hard for the big oak tree out back that Renee used to climb as a girl. Their offer landed at $780,000, all cash, quick close, no contingencies, exactly the clean deal Patricia had told me to hold out for. I sat in Denise's office and signed that purchase agreement with a hand steadier than I expected, thinking the whole time about Todd's voice drifting up through those basement vents. He's not safe alone anymore, like it was the simplest math in the world. Well, Todd, I remember thinking as I signed my name, somebody's not safe around here. Turns out it was never me. About 2 weeks after I signed, Renee came home from work practically glowing, the way she used to look coming off the stage after a dance recital as a little girl. Todd's company was sending the 2 of them on a 7-day cruise out of Baltimore, an early anniversary gift from his boss for closing some big account. Renee spent the whole dinner talking about the excursions they'd booked and the dress she'd bought for formal night. Perfect timing, actually, Dad, Todd said, not realizing how right he was. While we're gone, maybe think a little more about Maple Terrace. We could even put down a deposit before we're back, get things moving. I told him I'd give it some real thought, same steady voice I'd been practicing on him for weeks now, and inside my head I was already running the numbers. Denise and Patricia had the closing lined up to happen in as little as 10 days once both sides signed off, and the Whitfields, cash in hand and anxious to get moved in before the baby came, were ready to go the moment I gave the word. Renee and Todd left for the port on a Saturday morning, suitcases stacked by the front door, Renee reminding me twice to water her ferns while they were away. I stood on the porch and waved as Todd's SUV backed out of the driveway, the same driveway Renee used to chalk hopscotch squares on as a kid. And the moment that car turned off Chestnut Ridge Road and disappeared from sight, I picked up the phone and called Denise Okafor. I told her one thing: move the closing up. Let's get it done this week while they're gone, before they ever get the chance to come home and put a stop to something that's already finished. The closing happened that Wednesday, 4 days into their cruise, in a small back office at the title company downtown. Marcus and Aisha Whitfield sat across from me, Aisha's hand resting easy on her belly, both of them lit up talking about painting the nursery a soft yellow. I signed page after page, feeling lighter with every stroke of the pen. When it was finally done, Denise handed me a check for $780,000, minus fees and her commission. More money than I'd ever held in one place in my whole life. I'd already found my new place a couple weeks earlier, a bright little independent living cottage in a community called Riverbend, 25 minutes north along the Susquehanna, with a screened porch looking out over the water and a workshop out back, where I could still tinker with wood the way I always had. Nobody handed me that brochure. I found it myself, walked through it myself, paid cash for it myself, and signed my own lease with my own name. I spent that Wednesday afternoon and all day Thursday with two movers I'd quietly booked weeks in advance, packing up 36 years of a life. Donna's quilts, my father's old toolbox, the photographs off the stairwell wall. Everything that actually mattered to me, and left the rest for the Whitfields, who were happy to take most of the furniture off my hands at a fair price rather than have me haul it out. Anything left behind that belonged to Renee and Todd, I had the movers box up carefully and drop at a storage unit across town, with the key left with my lawyer for them to collect whenever they were ready. By Thursday evening, the house on Chestnut Ridge Road belonged, free and clear, to Marcus and Aisha Whitfield. The locks had already been changed by a locksmith Denise arranged, and I was sitting on my new screened porch at Riverbend, watching the light fade gold over the river with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, feeling more peace settle into my bones than I had in over a year. Before I left Chestnut Ridge Road that last time, I sat down at the kitchen table where Donna and I had eaten breakfast together for 38 years and wrote one final letter. Not to wound her, just to tell the truth plain. I taped it to the front door, right at eye level, in an envelope with Renee's name written across the front in the same handwriting I used to sign her permission slips for school field trips. I told her I knew everything. I told her I'd been standing at the bottom of the basement stairs that Tuesday morning with a box of canning jars in my hands, when I heard Todd tell someone named Cheryl that I wasn't safe alone anymore, and that I'd heard him talk about the $780,000 like it was already spent and gone. I told her the house had been sold, honest and legal, to a good young family who deserved that oak tree far more than two people who'd spent the better part of a year plotting how to put their own father away. I told her I wasn't burning with anger anymore, not really, just carrying a disappointment heavier than anger ever could be, and that I hoped one day she understood exactly what it feels like to have somebody decide you're a problem to be managed instead of a person to be loved. I told her not to bother trying my old cell number, since that account was already closed, but that I'd pick up the phone the day she called, just to say she was sorry, and actually meant every word of it. I signed it the same way I'd signed every birthday card since she was 7 years old. Love, Dad. Then I locked that door for the very last time, climbed into my truck, and drove away from Chestnut Ridge Road without a single glance in the rearview mirror. Renee told me later, though I didn't hear it from her own mouth until nearly 3 weeks after the fact, that she and Todd pulled into that driveway on a Saturday evening, still sunburned and relaxed from the cruise. Renee already chattering about unpacking and checking on her ferns. Todd walked up to that front door with his key out, same as he'd done 1,000 times before, and it simply refused to turn. He figured the lock was stuck, jiggled it, tried it again, hollered back to Renee that something was wrong. That's when Marcus Whitfield opened the door from the inside, confused, asking Todd who exactly he was and why he was trying to force his way into their house. According to my neighbor Ray, who watched the whole thing unfold from his own porch across the street, the way he'd watched most everything on that block for 30 years, Todd stood frozen on the front steps a long moment before he spotted the envelope taped beside the door frame with Renee's name on it. Ray said Renee tore it open right there on the front lawn and that her hands started shaking somewhere around the third line. He said Todd grabbed it out of her grip when she couldn't get through the rest, read it himself, and that's when she dropped straight down onto the grass, sobbing loud enough that two neighbors came out to see what in the world was happening. Ray said Todd just stood there holding that letter, staring at a house that no longer held one single thing that belonged to him, in front of a young couple he'd never laid eyes on a street he'd been so sure would be his in a matter of months. My phone started ringing about 6 minutes after that, according to the timestamp. I didn't answer, not that night. Renee called me 43 times over the next 4 days. I let every one of them roll to voicemail, not to be cruel, but because I wanted her to sit inside that feeling for a while. The exact feeling she and Todd had been so ready to hand me without a second thought. On the fifth day, sitting out on my screen porch at Riverbend with the river turning silver under the evening sky, I finally picked up. Her voice broke apart the second I said hello. Dad, please, we didn't mean it the way it sounded. We can fix this. Just tell us where you are. I let her talk herself out, let her get through the crying and the excuses about money being tight and stress from work, and things just spiraling faster than either of them meant for. When she finally ran out of words, I told her the truth as plain as I knew how. I told her I'd heard every word of that phone call from the basement stairs, that I knew about the power of attorney dressed up to look like insurance paperwork, that I'd known exactly what Maple Terrace and $780,000 meant to her and Todd for weeks before I ever said a word to either of them about any of it. I told her I wasn't going to scream at her, because she was still my daughter, and I still loved her more than she probably believed right then. But that love had never meant I owed her a house I'd spent 36 years paying for, especially not after she'd stood by and let her husband decide on his own that I wasn't safe to keep around. I told her I was happy, genuinely happy, in a place I'd picked for myself, surrounded by folks my own age who treated me like a person instead of a line item on somebody's spreadsheet. Before I hung up, I told her the door wasn't shut forever, just for now, and that it would open back up whenever she was ready to see me as her father again, and not as $780,000 standing between her and the life she thought she was owed. I set the phone down next to my cooling coffee and looked out over that river one more time, feeling, for the first time, in longer than I could rightly remember, completely and finally at peace. If you've made it this far with me, then you already know what it feels like when a quiet man finally decides he's done being quiet.